Okay, so far we've learned about how to use curves. We've learned about NURBS tools like the extrude, the loft, and the revolve. So we're going to talk about a few more of them. But before I get into that, I want to talk about the selection method of the components of the NURBS. We've been selecting the components for a while now, but now to specify what those selections mean. Okay, so if I come to my create NURBS primitives, I can create a sphere, and I see this box here, and this box enables me to go into the settings of how I want the sphere to be created. So if I click on it, it will open up a dialog window where I can make some settings to how I want my sphere to be created. The first option here is pivot, and the pivot is by default determined by the object. So we see the pivot in the center of the object. We can also do user defined and determine where else we want the pivot to be. And if I click on user defined, now we have three options. Now I've made this comment: anywhere you see three boxes this way, the first one is the X, the second is the Y, and the third is the Z axis. Okay, now based on axis, I can determine where the pivot is pointing towards, so that's where the poles of the object is. So I'm going to do some quickly, and I'm going to create different spheres. So first of all, I'm going to create apply so that this dialog window opens, and I'm going to use first of all the normal object mode. Okay, so if I click apply, we see that our sphere is created with this pivot at the center of the object and on the point of origin and the scene. Okay, so if I move this away and go to user defined, now I can change that center. Let's say I put it on the X axis and I type 1. Okay, so once I do that, I can now click apply. Then you see that the sphere is now created and the pivot is on the center on the X axis, not in the center of the object. Okay, so using 1, just like we talked about scale, 0 means it's there is no movement and there is no object that you can see. So in this case there is no movement, but 1 means there is movement on that axis. Okay, so if I move this out of the way now, and let's take for instance I turn this back to 0 and I use the Y axis and I go, let's say 1 again, hit enter, then apply. Then we see the sphere is created and the pivot is at the bottom of the sphere. Okay, so moving back, turn back to 0. Alright, now the axis, if you notice all the spheres, their axis poles are facing the Y direction. Okay, no matter where their pivots are. So if I select X axis for instance and hit apply, watch what happens. Now the poles are facing the X axis. Okay, so this is a good way to create spheres and determine where their poles will face, and this applies to any object that has the axis poles. Okay, so you can turn that back to the Y because we're going to the Z. We have it facing the Z axis instead. Then we can determine the start sweep angle, end sweep angle, the radius, that's the size of the sphere, we can do the surface degree, like this is linear for now. So I'll come back here and turn this pivot to basic in like the object mode. Then if I leave from linear and I click apply, now I have a more linear kind of NURBS. It's a more defined surface. It's similar to the polygon sphere we used, or when I showed you how the polygon sphere will look like when it has 8 sections and 4 spans. So if you want your NURBS to look like a polygon, that's when you go linear, but cubic will make it look more like a NURBS surface. So I'm just gonna move this out of the way and turn back to cubic. So now if I do using of tolerance, and I have local and global. Local is based on the object axis, global is based on the world axis. So then I'll use your spans. Okay, so if I close this window, we can also access it by double clicking on the object from the shelf here, and we can still get access to that same menu that we used. Alright, so I'm just gonna close this up. Anytime you do settings like this and you are not sure of what was the original settings, you can always come here, edit and reset settings. If you like what you did, you can click on save settings. So I'm going to reset settings now, so it goes back to the way it was. Then I click on create. Okay, so now we have NURBS spheres all and everywhere, and created in different modes. So this is just one way to understand creation of spheres. So now I want to talk about selection of the components of the sphere. So now when you right click, you see there's green lines, there's subdivision lines. When it comes to NURBS, they are not really called subdivisions, rather they are called sections and spans. So sections run across from the poles down, while the spans run across the poles. So if you right click on your NURBS surface, you will get different menus than you get with polygons. So here we have the Isoparms, we have control vertex, and we have the hull, and those are the most important ones to use. Isoforms are now these sections, so we use the sections and the spans to create isoforms. So all these lines that we see across, those are what we'll call isoforms with the NURBS surfaces. So if I right click and go into isoform mode, you see if I click on this line, I can create an isoform. I'll select an isoform. Now I've created a line across to make more detail. So I can select an isoform this way, I can select an isoform this way, or I can create one across this point, or create one across this point. So if I want to create an isoform along the poles, I will select a line or a pole line and create an isoform. If I want to create an isoform along the spans, I'll select a span and drag and place there. Now these dotted lines doesn't mean anything because I'm just creating portions here that can be used. Okay, so these are the basic isoforms for the sphere. And what if I want to create another isoform here to create some more detail on the object? Notice if I click away, it disappears. So how do I create a new detailed span here? So very simple, I come and drag up to where I want the detail to be. Now once I have that line, I can come into surfaces here. So under surfaces, I will look for what we call insert Isoparms, and that will be under the edit NURBS surfaces menu. So I come in here and I can click on insert Isoforms. Okay, we have settings for that as well, and this will talk about where the section will be. Should it be at selection or between selections, or multiplicity? How many should I make of the Isopoms? So I'm just gonna do default right now and just click on insert. So now I've created a new level of detail for my object. I've selected, I've made another detail, and it's only on that point. So that's how I can create new isoforms on my sphere. Now the second option is to use the control vertex. Now when I use the control vertex are this point, and notice just like we had with the curves, they are not exactly on the surface of the object, they hang outside of the surface of the object. So let me switch view so you can see that. Alright, so how do I use this control vertices now? If I want to select the vertex, I can select the vertex and use it to manipulate my object, and you can see how rubbery the object is. Okay, so if I select a group like this, I could take them up, so, and I have that selection there. So I'm just going to undo everything, get back into there. Okay, so what if I want to deform a specific point of the sphere, and I don't want to just work on one isopom, I want to work on the deformity to affect a number of vertices along the center. Now I could come into my tools box, or I could double click on my move tool here. Then I come into the settings and I look for what we call soft selection. The short key to get here is the short key to activate the soft select is to use the B key on the keyboard. Now what does the soft selection do? If you scroll down, you see this kind of gradient. So what it tells you is the yellow place is the place with highest form of influence, and down to the black. So if I click on soft selection now, you'd see that it's shown a level of selection for all the objects that are close by and they are yellow. So if I move this, you see it's moving everything, even though it's not translating the sphere, but it's affecting movement of the sphere. And that's because the soft selection fall off radius right now, it's on 5. So if I reduce the level of fall off, then you now see a few are yellow and some are red, some are black. That means if I move this way, that only affects just a particular number of vertices. So soft selection is used to create deformation on an object with a fall off range, so I don't have to select one object, one vertex or one component per time. Okay, so I'm just going to reset this and turn it off. Okay, so that's the control vertex. Now the other form of selection is to use the hull, and the hull will enable us to select along the edges, in quotes, or along the isopom. So if I select one hull, it selects the whole edge that the hull is affecting, and all the vertices on that edge are selected. So if I want to scale down that point, I could go in and scale it down. So I'll use the hull to affect a number of vertices along an axis. So that's using the B key, and I can always go in and change the level of influence for my self-selection. So the fall-off mode is on volumes. I can use surface, I can use global, I can use objects to different fall-offs. And if I use object, watch what happens. Let's do something here. Let me go like remove mode. Now notice this object is not selected. Okay, so if I double click on this and I come into my self-selection mode and I choose object or surface, if I choose object, you can see I can affect other objects in my scene. Okay, so the self-selection will affect every other object in my scene. What if I use global? Then you can see I can affect the global vertices along all the objects in my scene. Okay, but if I use surface, I'm going to be working specifically on this object. So but I'm just going to use volume so that I can open that. So that's usually how the self-selection works. Okay, so like I said with the hull, if I want to work on the hull, I just select and it goes around. But if I select it in the vertical point, it selects only the vertices along a particular axis, not all over the object. So to select this, I'll have to hold down the shift key and select this other one, so that when I try scaling, I can scale in just on that part of the object. Okay, so these are how we select the many components of our NURBS surface, and we'll be using it in other modeling exercises throughout this course, so it's something to get acquainted to.